Hi, I'm B. Come along with me today as I just explore some things that have been on my mind lately. Um, that is, there's two things I think I really want to talk about, and that is the idea that all paths lead to the same place, and then also I want to talk a little bit about, I think that they merge, so that's why I'm saying two topics. So we'll find out. I want to talk about what it means to be awake versus what it means to be woke, and how these words are weaponized by how they're weaponized. So yeah, so let's see what happens. So let's start with the latter of the two. So I think we're all familiar with this idea that there's this cultural war and this sort of political war between what we call the right and the left. And sometimes we call it the radical left or the far right. But either way, we're talking about this cultural division. And wokeism is generally attributed to the left, while many people refer to themselves as being awake, not woke, if they're on the right side of this culture war. And each one of them has sort of these distinct set of ideologies and beliefs that are a part of them. And I think that each of them has their own, each of them understands the world around them in a distinct way, and there is some truth to both, to each. But I think that the truth is sort of transcendent of even this idea of these cultural divisions and differences. And so let me just I'll talk a little bit about wokeism first, because that's just sort of, I don't know if that's easier to talk about or not. It's sort of a very taboo topic to talk about, and it may or may not get me in trouble here, but what I'm hearing and what I understand being put out there as wokeism is sort of this idea of the collective is greater than the individual, and that that individuals must sacrifice their personal autonomy and freedom for the greater good. That which is sort of ironic, because another thing that wokeism sort of hinges on is identity politics are a huge part of wokeism, and that means that when someone identifies in a certain way, so for example, someone identifies as a certain gender and they want to be referred to with all of this sort of like markers of that gender. So they want to use the pronouns that are associated with that gender, and they want people to treat them as they would treat that gender, even if the people around them don't perceive them as such, even if they don't appear as such, even if their behavior isn't necessarily something that we would associate with that gender. There's still an expectation that the external world around that person who has that identity, who identifies in that way, would all sort of bow to their wishes, okay? And so that's sort of like a generalized way of talking about what identity politics are. One form of identity politics. Of course, we have many different things. We have, we have race as an identity politics. We have sexuality and gender each as identity politics. We have things like body type and level of ability or disability as identity politics. There are many different forms of this type of identity politics that we have. It takes many different shapes, and but it's sort of like this, like multi-headed hydra that we have today. And if you step on the wrong side of those identity politics, it can be extremely vitriolic. If you make a mistake or you don't say something in the right way, there's a lot of policing of language. There's a lot of gatekeeping around language. There's a lot of cancel culture that's happening. So people get, their all of their personal information will get put out on the internet. People will attack them online, like go onto their personal profile on social media and attack them and say all kinds of things. We'll find out, we'll do something, like actually it's like stalking somebody. So they'll find out their address, their phone number, who their children are, what school they go to, where they work, what their history is. All of these things will be identified and oftentimes put out on the internet. That means that all of their personal, private information, all the things that they need in order to be safe in the world and not be harmed by people and not be taken advantage of by criminals, is put out for the whole entire world to see. And then and oftentimes they will lose their reputation is wrecked. They will lose their livelihood, their employment, which means their ability to support themselves and their families. They will they will lose whole friends, whole groups of friends, because they did or said something the wrong way, according to this group of people. Or they didn't, they didn't kowtow to whatever the norm is of the day. And it's a very rapidly shifting thing, so it changes a lot. So it's very difficult to know if you're using the right thing. It reminds me a lot of what it's like to grow up in a narcissistic family, where you have to really walk on eggshells to make sure that the central narcissist in question doesn't get triggered and tripped up by something and then go off into a rampage, and then all of the flying monkeys come in to support that abuser. And it's really kind of a crazy phenomenon, and it's a part of our natural, and it's not natural, but it's a part of our everyday experience today. It's become the norm in society in this bizarre way. And so that is associated with wokeism. I think wokeism, when it was first sort of being put out there for people to stay woke, it was happening in communities of color, and around this idea that it's important to stay alert, right? To stay aware of what's going on around you, and to recognize the subtle ways that things are maybe are constructed to hurt you or make it difficult for you to get ahead in life. And there is a lot of that has happened in and I'm speaking as an American, so from an American perspective, and the phenomenon that's happening in America, although it is happening all over the world. I think it has subtle differences in different countries, and so I'm really only speaking to what's going on here. But in America, we do have a history. We have a history of slavery, and we have a history of Jim Crow, and we have a history of these sort of like very subtle forms of racism that have happened and been systemically embedded into our society. So expectations, there are like societal expectations, social expectations, but then there's also, laws that have been put in place. So for example, like redlining is a great example that most people have heard of, but if you haven't heard of redlining, it's something that happened in a period of time in our history when the Black community or African American community, was living freely in the world, but when they were developing cities in certain ways, what they would do is they would run like a highway through to break up an area, right, and separate the white side from the black side. So technically we didn't have segregation, but legal sense there was no segregation, but it was enforced by developing the city in such a way that it split up whole neighborhoods, and it also in that way split up the wealth of that community. So and another form of redlining was happening when it would make it impossible for Black families or families of color to be able to get a loan, a mortgage loan, to purchase a house, in particular in certain neighborhoods, so that they could only purchase their homes in Black neighborhoods, which were not receiving the same level of services as the white neighborhoods. And so, it was a way of sort of circumventing the law, like getting beneath the law to create all these other little rules to prevent people from being able to really flourish. Okay, so that's just one example, just an example of how that happened. There are many, 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 and it's too much for me to get into to talk about what I want to be talking about. But so that's just to kind of like, that's sort of one of the ways that we can think about wokeism is the birth of being woke is about knowing your history, knowing the truth of what happened, and understanding that there are still subtle echoes of that in our society today, even if some of those rules and some of those laws have been changed, and you couldn't get away with that technically today. Like, for example, in real estate, we'll just kind of stick with that example, real estate. But it is true that there have been some studies done that show that people who have a Black sounding name are less likely to get a call back on an interview. I don't know what the statistics are for today in 2024, but I know that the last time that I looked at that and thought about that was the case. And I know it wasn't that long ago. I remember seeing a story about a Black family that was trying to sell their home, beautiful home, and they were quoted a huge amount less when they tried to sell it on their own and under their own name. But then they had a friend who put it under his name, a white friend who put it under his name and showed the house using his face. They took down everything that was from their family, and they were offered a tremendous amount more on their home sale. And so there are subtle ways that it continues today. Okay, and the idea of being woke is like, let's be alert that these things still happen. These subtle underpinnings of racism still exist and are still affecting people today. And let's not forget that. Let's be aware of that, and let's do what we can to come against that, because I think pretty much almost everyone, I mean, of course, there are people who are out there who are really outright racist, who just are very ignorant, who exist. But I think the majority of people would agree that that is a horrible thing, right? And we don't want that in our society, and we want to get rid of all of that in all the ways that we can, okay? So, but as often happens with all things that might have like a good intention, like there's that saying, good intention paves the road to hell, okay? And what we're doing is we're seeing that happen, where people who have good intentions have lost sight of the bigger picture, I think, and are willing to just set everything on fire for their personal ideology, and have just sort of lost the plot, I think, in a way. I don't want to go too far down that particular rabbit hole. I feel like that's a whole video by itself. As someone who I've always considered myself a leftist, up until recently, and I've participated in a lot of protests over the years. I'm a Gen Xer, and I feel my core values are about personal liberty, personal privacy, freedom of speech, the protection of our constitutional rights, and also ideologically, I like the idea of egalitarianism. I like the idea of having compassion for one another, treating each other well, the golden rule. The golden rule. And that's always sort of been like a guiding through line for me. And what I've noticed is that there's this line that if you stare into the abyss too long, it sort of becomes you. Like the monsters that you abhor, you wind up becoming. And I feel like a lot of people have stared into that abyss for far too long, and so I think that's what we're seeing a lot, that it's just gone so far to the extreme, and people don't recognize that there actually are doing the exact things that they say are so bad, but they just can't see it. And then conversely, on the other side, we have people who are saying, be awake, be awake, be awake. I'm awake, I'm not woke. It's like this sort of this response to what has become wokeism, or what people call the woke MOB, or mind V, or there's certain things I'm just not going to say out loud, but or you could even call it a sort of like cult mentality, or some people might say mass hypnosis. So there's been this counter response, this sort of knee-jerk response to that. That's, the pendulum swings, right? And so where is the balance? So there's been this counter response to that, and a lot of people are saying, I'm awake, not woke. And so, and those people tend to be on the right wing of politics, and they will, a lot of times when people, especially when people are like myself, who maybe were on one side and then saw that things were not the way that we thought that they were, that there has been agency capture, there's been corporate capture, there's been, like changes have happened in some of these, like governmental agencies, for example, like the EPA is a great example. So, when I was a preteen and a teenager, I remember driving through Gary, Indiana as a child. We drove a lot because we were a military family, and so we drove all across this country. And the most polluted place that I ever saw was Gary, Indiana, and we could barely breathe driving through it, and that was in the early 70s. And it was, the smog was so dense, it was like, it was like, not quite like night, but close. It was so dark, and it stank so bad. It was so awful. I will never forget it. And then after that, there was a measure to clean up the air, and because there was pollution, a lot of pollution, air pollution happening in the 70s, and then there was a measure to do some cleaning up the air. The EPA was really working on that, and we did do that. And then later on, some of those regulations, like there were scrubbers put into smokestacks and that sort of thing. And then some of those regulations were rescinded and changed, and so now we're experiencing smog again in some of our bigger cities. And so we kind of keep going up and down with this. But and then there started to be this talk about global warming, and I don't remember what year that was. That I remember that in my lifetime that I remember that beginning to be a topic, but they started to notice this trend, and it started to become more fear-mongering around climate change, rather than cleaning up pollution, cleaning up the environmental toxins, the things that are creating so much illness in our country, and contributing to this idea of climate change. And when you start to look into the science, the climate science, and you really dig into it, what you discover, which I, of course, for a long time was like, no way. That's, when people would say, oh, but climate change, global warming is a lie or whatever, I'd be like, whatever, can you not see it with your own eyes? But when you begin to actually read the science and look at the patterns and the Paleolithic patterns that are measurable, what you see is that the climate has fluctuated, has always fluctuated. So we might be warmer now than we were like 50 years ago, but if you go all the way back to prehistoric times, what you find is that there's a fluctuation, and it's a pretty steady fluctuation of hotter and colder, hotter and colder, hotter and colder. And so there's like a natural rhythm to the climate, and of course that makes sense, right? Because there's a natural rhythm to everything that is alive, and so, but there are still changes that are happening that we can discern, and that's a topic I don't really want to get into too much, but just to say that what happened is while all of this argument was taking place, there was a capture of the EPA agency and of top environmentalists. And, love of money, right, is the root of all evil. And the love of money corrupts people. And there is no one who is above that temptation, right? So scientists succumb to it all the time. It happens all the time. Every kind of scientist can be bought and manipulated. And so that includes environmental scientists, that includes environmental activists, that includes the lobbyists. If you throw enough money at somebody, they will eventually cave. It takes a very strong person not to cave to money, and I think that the only way that you can not cave to money is if you have Jesus in your life. So now we have this thing called carbon capture, which is when you it sounds great, right? When we hear about it, we're like, oh yeah, and then we're gonna capture the carbon, and we're gonna use less carbon, and we're gonna pollute less. We don't want less CO2 in the air, and because it contributes to all these things and all this and that. But there's a lot of really good information out there, and there's some really great films out there about this topic, and what it really means to sequester carbon. So the natural means of sequestering carbon is it already happens. The earth already does it. Have we interfered with the earth's ability to do it? Yes. What does that interference look like? It looks like desertifying our climate. And so what does that mean? That means like industrialized, big ag style farming. So when we have big tech getting involved, we have robotics getting involved, we have a lot of chemical farming getting involved, we have fields that get plowed over and over and over and over and over again and never get a rest. And we don't allow our animals to just graze freely. What we do is we are destroying our soil. We're taking all the nutrients out of our soil, and all of the plant life that grows in that soil, its roots get smaller and smaller and smaller. And the shorter a root is, the less able it is to sequester the soil, or to sequester carbon, I mean. And so then there's more carbon in the air and less in the soil, right? And there's just this bizarre idea about, that are being put out there to sort of like kind of trade for your carbon footprint. So, driving less somehow is going to make a difference. Eating less red meat is going to make a difference because cows make methane. But the truth is that when cows graze freely, and they're just allowed to do their thing, and we don't interfere with that, and we're not putting chemicals in the earth, and we're not shooting up chemicals in the cows, and we're just letting them to be natural, okay? We allow the natural cycle to do what it does as it was created to be. What happens is the cows go along, they eat the grass, they eat all of the green living things, and they poop, and their poop is compost, and it nourishes the soil, and exactly the right things are inside that poop that goes into the soil, that then nourishes that soil, and then that soil becomes more nourishing for the plants that grow in it, and then the root system grows deeper, and when the root system grows deeper, there's a greater biodiversity that comes. So some of the birds that we've lost will come back. Some of the insects that we lost will come back. Also, amazingly, the rain cycle returns. And so then we have a lusher environment. It's not as dry, right? And when we don't have a dry environment and our soil is moist, then it's able to keep that carbon in the ground better. And then as the roots grow deeper, that sequesters also more of the carbon dioxide. And here's the other thing. We are carbon. We're all made of carbon. Every living thing is comprised of carbon. And all of the green living things need carbon to live. So, and when you go back to that sort of Paleolithic climate fluctuation, what you find is that when there are greater levels of carbon dioxide in the air, the earth is more lush and verdant and, like nourishing, okay? And when there is less carbon in the air, then we have more of a desert type of environment. It is harsher for existence, and life is more difficult to live. It becomes more like Mars. So we need cows to do what they do. And we need carbon. We need it. We are it. So we don't want to get rid of carbon. We don't want to eliminate that. We want to eliminate toxins. We want to eliminate man-made chemicals and pollutants. We want to stop trying to tweak and fix in what is not broken. We need to stop playing God with our environment and allow the natural way that everything was created to do its thing. It was already made perfect. But our agencies have been captured, and our activists and our lobbyists have all been captured, and the people that we once trusted are now beholden to these entities that are pulling the strings of the larger world. Again, another topic we won't get into, but they're controlling the narrative. And so that's just an example of agency capture and how it affects us and how it affects their narrative and how it affects our thinking. So now we've got these, we want to make everything electric, and there are a lot of problems with that, because when we make everything electric, first of all, we don't have the ability to support an all electric lifestyle for all people right now. It doesn't exist. And in order to do that, we have to have all these wind farms and all these solar farms. And it is true that we don't have the ability to store all of that energy. So even if we could create an excess of wind and solar energy, we don't have the ability to store it for use when there's no wind and there's no sun. That doesn't exist yet. And in order to create solar farms and wind farms, we have to use so much more petrochemicals than we do when we're just relying solely on gas, when we're relying solely on natural gas and petroleum. The numbers are out there. And the reason is because we have to, first of all, what are all of those, what are the windmills that we have made of? What are the solar panels made of? And how are they constructed in factories? And if we're not using petroleum, then we're probably using coal. In a lot of places, that is what happens. Also, we have to mine for all of these rare minerals. for the batteries, for lithium batteries, and to create the solar panels. There's a lot of mining that's going on, and with that mining, we're blasting off the tops of whole mountains. And not only are we doing that, but then there's this runoff that happens, and the runoff is immensely toxic. And on top of that, there's all of these, I guess I'm on this tangent, but here we go. On top of that, a lot of the rare minerals that are being mined, it's not happening here in America. There are some mines here, but primarily it's in China and India. And do you know who's doing that? There are a lot of open pit mines, and there are children, small children, in these open pit mines, sifting through them, pulling out these rare minerals. And they are working under slave-like conditions. So child slavery. So everything that we use that uses a lithium battery, all of our modern technology is all subject to this. So our phones, all of our solar energy, and the bigger it gets, the bigger that gets. And the more, when let's think about this, when we are chopping off the tops of mountains, it's not just the mountain, like we often think of, like a mountain is just this giant rock, right? But it's not just the mountain. The mountains generally are forested. Most mountains have a lot of forest on them. And so we're destroying whole forests in order to get to these rare minerals. And when we destroy a forest, when we deforest an area, this is something we used to really care about. When we deforest an area, then what we're doing is what does a tree do? A tree sequesters carbon. It takes all that carbon out of the air, and it drives it deep down into the soil. And a tree has really deep roots. And the older a tree is, the deeper its roots are, and the more carbon is sequestered, like any kind of plant, okay? So that means that we're creating increased desertification. That means that we're creating more carbon in the air, okay? Not only that, but we've got these wind farms that are offshore that are killing whales. Greenpeace, the main purpose of Greenpeace used to be about saving the whales. That was a really big deal when I was a kid, saving the whales. And now whales are beaching themselves, and this stuff is not, we're not allowed to talk about it. We're not allowed to talk about it. Ask yourself about that. The things that we're not allowed to talk about, that we get in trouble for talking about, that we get canceled for talking about, or we get called a conspiracy theorist for talking about. Things that are actually happening, that are actually true and factual, and you can find the information is right in front of your face. That's not hidden. We're just being chastised for talking about it. So we're back to a state where our whales are endangered again and going extinct again. In my own lifetime, it's happening. We got them back, and now they're going extinct again because of the wind farms. And the same thing with the wind farms is happening to birds. It's actually happening. Because birds migrate in a pattern. And so when we put up these giant structures that are in the way of that pattern, the birds come up against that, and also there's like just so much going on with these that we're not taking into consideration. It's not like one of these huge things, like they're the size of like an airplane, of a giant jet. Have you ever seen one driving down the road? They're huge. So we have whole flocks of birds that are being killed. We have endangered birds that are being killed. And when we lose any species on our planet, we're decreasing the biodiversity. And when we decrease the biodiversity of our planet, what we're doing is, because we need each type of fish and bird and animal and bug, we need it all for this fine-tuned balance to exist, for life to exist. And so, just as we talk about the bees, save the bees, it's the same thing with every type of creature out there that we have. Like, when we are doing things that endanger that species, then we actually are endangering our own selves, and we're endangering all life on Earth. And there's no way to survive that. So it is existential. And that's not to say that, oil spills are not a bad thing. It's not to say that we shouldn't be figuring out a better way, but let's not, make it worse in the process, right? Let's be smart about it. So that's just a long tangent, but I think it's just really important for us to be thinking about the things that we have always taken as sort of the unassailable truth. For us to look at that unassailable truth and to examine it and to look at what underpins it, and to ask ourselves, is there more to this that I'm unaware of? For certainly there is. There certainly is more. And to examine that. And then conversely, on the other side, so we have this knee-jerk reaction, and people are like, oh, I'm awake, I'm not woke. And so then they go and they just identify with the political right wing, and they, especially when you start to, that's what I was talking about before. So especially when you start to kind of wake up, right? Become awake. You wake up out of the trance of wokeism, the capture of our good intentions, and then the subversion and twisting around of those good intentions, which then creates this kind of mass hypnosis where we just we haven't realized it, that's what's going on, because we're like frogs in a pot of water that's slowly brought to a boil. So then we realize, holy crap, I'm in boiling water. We jump out of the boiling water and we start to look around us and examine things, and we're like, oh my gosh, all these things that I thought were true are not true. And then what we do is we take everything that is associated with the opposing side, quote unquote, the supposed opposing side, the right wing, and we take all of those things and we're like, okay, well, if that stuff is a lie and this stuff is true, then all this other stuff must also be true. And then we have people saying, I'm awake. I'm with the white hats, and it can really happen when you start to look at when you start to look into supposed conspiracy theories. And this is something I've been interested in my whole adult life, and a lot of older leftists like myself are very familiar with a lot of conspiracy theories and are like, yeah, of course, we know that, right? But the climate has changed. We have whole generations that have come up after us that have experienced life in a different way, have been educated in a different way, things that we are uneven aware of because it wasn't happening to us, and so we didn't even know. And so, we have generations that have a completely different perception of reality now, because of this sort of like very long game, slow capture of our government, our governmental agencies, our corporations, our sort of societal norms, our education system, all of it. So So yeah, so then you start to look at conspiracy theories and you're like, oh my gosh, this is true and that's true and that's true, and it's all right there out in the open, easy to find, super easy to find. Do a Freedom of Information Act request on whatever it is that you're interested in. There's so much information out there. We are just like drowning in information, even in a period of increased censorship and narrative control and mass hypnosis. Even with all of that going on, even with all of the doublespeak going on, the information is there. We're drowning in it. It's right under our noses. If it was a snake, it would have bit us. It probably already has. So, yeah, a vast majority of those things that we are told to call conspiracy theories are actually conspiracy realities. But that doesn't mean that everything that is a conspiracy theory is actually factual. And we have to continue to do the work to explore that and to ask questions about it and to investigate it and to be curious and to get all of the information, not just some of the information. And it also behooves us greatly to remember, no matter, first of all, that saying that the left wing and the right wing belong to the same bird. Okay, we like to use that phrase to talk about the corruption of government, and that's a great metaphor. The powers that be, that pull the strings of everything, that have many different names and euphemisms, have their fingers in the pots of the left and the right wing, right? Just as most wealthy people, truly wealthy people, will invest in both sides of a conflict, so that no matter who wins, they come out on top. Okay, so that's all true. It's all true. It's a great metaphor. But consider this. We are the bird. Okay? America is the bird. That's us. That's all of us. So no matter what our ideology is, no matter what we believe, no matter how we identify, we are all the bird together, united in this one country. We are the bird. Okay? And we need both wings if we're going to fly. If we are going to soar, if we are going to transcend our difficulties, if we are going to rise above and not get mired in the crap and the crud, if we are going to fly as a bird ought to, okay, we need both wings to fly. We don't need the corruption, okay? The corruption is like a wounding in our wings, okay? But we need each other. We need each other. And so when we just have like a knee-jerk response because we're like, that person is my enemy, then we are playing right into the hands of the people who pull the strings. I've said this before, and I don't think it can be said enough. And there's a lot of people there. I'm hearing people talk about like how they're so awake, you know, and they've kind of got this like superiority complex, like, you know, well, I see the things that you don't see, you know, I'm more awake than you are, I'm more enlightened than you are, and therefore I am superior, I am more special than you are. And you, that's just, what? We need each other. We really need each other. And this divisiveness only plays into the hands of the dark principalities that run things. And they only run things because we allow it. And how do we allow it? By focusing on each other, instead of taking the battle where it belongs, which is in the spirit, in the spiritual realm. So we allow the other group's fear-mongering to affect us, and we get caught up in these tribalistic camps, and then we think we're special, and we think we have some kind of special knowledge that the other people don't have, and that's just not true. That's just not true. That knowledge already exists within us. We're so quick to point, and it's even happening, like, it's so much fracturing is happening that even on each side of things, in each wing, we've got the left, like there is this, people like to say the left, they eat themselves, but it's happening on the right too. Both sides will turn on each other. So if you are like, but what about this thing, or you point out something that just doesn't look right, sit right, sound right, feel right, isn't factual, doesn't like align with the status quo ideology of that side, then they'll turn on you. And it happens on both wings. It happens. That's how corrupted things are. That's how insidious the spiritual warfare is, that the enemy of our souls has come against us so much, not only to make us believe that we are embattled against one another, but also that in our own camps that we can't trust one another, that person is a controlled opposition, right? That's a controlled opposition. It's not to say that these things don't happen. Certainly they do. Again, I would say that that's the work of the enemy of our soul, right? But it's even deeper than that, because it's inside of us that this is happening. And it causes us to mistrust everyone around us. And we need each other. We need each other in our camps. We need each other, and we need each other because we need both wings to fly. Okay? The right wing and the left wing do two different things. They serve two different purposes. When you're paddling a boat down a stream, you need a paddle on either side. Have you ever tried paddling with only one paddle? You're just going to go around in circles. You just go in circles. You need a paddle on either side to keep the boat going forward. Okay? They both serve different purposes. They're similar purposes, but they're both required. One side goes, you need them both. You need them both. Okay? And it's a reciprocating motion. It's the same with winging, flying. It's the same with walking. Any kind of way of moving forward. There's reciprocity, there's balance, there's equilibrium that's happening, and we need that. So we need to stay woke, and we need to be awake, and we need to be aware. We need to have our eyes open, and that means not being distracted by our supposed enemies. We're othering one another, when the enemy of our soul is up there, just like celebrating, right? Pulling those strings. So on either side, what that is that's mind control. That is mind control. That is brainwashing. One side believes one set of ideologies, the other side believes a different set of ideologies. Ne'er the two shall meet. And where the two meet is where there is true freedom. Because when you can mix and mingle your ideas, when you have a piece of the truth and I have the piece of the truth, and we bring that truth together, it is magnified, it is multiplied, the truth is exponentially greater when we bring it together. When every person who has something that they see of the truth and they bring it all together, then we have a whole. Okay? And when we are whole, we are complete. We are greater than the enemy of our soul. And I'm just going to end this by saying the word whole or wholeness is the etymological word of three different biblical words: salvation, justice, and righteousness. The etymological root of those three words is the word wholeness. Wholeness is completeness. It is well-being. Well-being is comes from the root word weal, W-E-A-L, and that word is the root word for health and for wealth. There's a secret here that the enemy of your soul does not want you to know, that you are wealthy and healthy when you are whole, and you are whole through salvation, through righteousness, through justice. And how do you acquire those things? When you are focused on wholeness, completeness, when you are focused on that rather than the division. Okay? There's a reason why our founding fathers said, united we stand, divided we fall. And actually that is biblical. It's a biblical statement. Okay? So I'm just going to leave it at that. I'm going to let you just chew on all of that, and I'll come back and I'll do another video of the other topic that I want to talk about, which is out of the many there is one. So please do add your thoughts and your comments. I would love to see what you have to say, what you're thinking about these things. And it's helpful for me because, as you know, that anytime that you engage with any of the videos that I make, it increases the algorithm. Other people are going to see it, and this can get out there, and people can hear what I'm talking about and thinking about and join in the conversation. And together we can come together, and we can cultivate a better world together. Okay, much love to you. I'll see you in the next one.